The rain fell in relentless sheets over Black Hollow, a logging town carved in the dense, dripping wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. Cedar and fir loomed like silent giants, their branches heavy with water, casting the streets in perpetual shadow. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap, sharp and alive, while the distant rumble of a sawmill pulsed through the mist. At the town's edge, a small bookshop sat wedged between a hardware store and a vacant loaded sign, pages in the rain, faded from years of weathering. Inside, the glow of amber lamps bathed rows of shelves in warmth, the musty scent of old paper mingling with the faint bitterness of brewing tea. A woman in her early 40s stood behind the counter, her silver-streaked black hair pulled into a loose braid. She wore a wool sweater, its sleeves rolled up to reveal wrists crisscrossed with faint scarce mementos of a life she didn't talk about. Her green eyes, sharp despite the lines framing them, scanned an inventory list as she chewed her lip. She'd run this shop for 15 years, a quiet refuge after escaping a marriage that had left her bruised in more ways than one. Her 12-year-old son, a lanky kid with her eyes and a mop of dark curls, sprawled in an armchair by the window, sketching ravens in a notebook. The shop was their sure sanctuary, his playground. The bell above the door tinkled, a soft chime swallowed by the storm's roar. She looked up as a man stepped in, shaking rain from his coat. He was broad-shouldered, late 40s, with a scruffy beard and a limp he tried to hide. His gray eyes met hers, and her pen froze mid-word. She knew him, her ex, husband's brother, the only one who'd ever shown her kindness back then. He'd disappeared after the divorce, swallowed by rumors of a new life, up in Alaska. Now he stood there, dripping on her floor, a battered envelope in his hand. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said, voice tight, setting the pen down slow. "Had to come back," he replied, his tone rough but warm, like gravel smoothed by a river. He slid the envelope across the counter. "This showed up at my place last month addressed to you. Thought you should see it." She eyed it like it might bite. The paper was creased, stained with coffee rings, her name scrawled in a hand she hadn't seen in years her ex's. "He's been gone a decade," she said, barely above a whisper. "Why now?" "Open it," he urged, leaning closer. "It's heavy." Her fingers hesitated, then tore it open. Inside, a key, small and brass, taped to a note. The words were uneven, rushed. "I lied to you. About everything. The truth's in the locker bus station. Slot 17. Don't trust him." Her throat tightened. "Him?" She glanced at her ex's brother, who watched her with a frown. "What locker?" she asked, voice shaking. "What's he mean, don't trust him?" He shrugged, but his eyes flickered guilt, maybe. "No idea. But I saw something else in there, a photo. You, me, him, back at the lake house. Something's off about it." She dug deeper, pulling out the snapshot of her younger self, laughing. Her ex beside her, his brother in the background. But the dates stamped on the corner stopped her cold. 6 months after he'd supposedly left town for good. "He was here," she breathed. "After he said he was done." "You knew?" His jaw tightened. I saw him once, yeah. He begged me not to tell you. Said he was protecting you." "Protecting me?" Her voice rose, sharp enough to make her son look up from his sketch. "He walked out, left us with nothing. And you covered for him?" "I didn't cover," he snapped and softened. "I thought he was gone for good after that, until this." She clutched the key, anger warring with dread. The bus station was a mile closed now, but she could check it at dawn. "What's he hiding?" she demanded. "And why drag you into it?" He shifted, uneasy. "I don't know the half of it, but I heard whispers up north, people looking for him. Dangerous types. If that locker's tied to them." A crash cut him off, glass shattering at the shop's rear. Her son yelped, dropping his pencil. She spun, heart racing, as footsteps crunched outside the broken back window. The rain battered Black Hollow with renewed fury, drumming against the bookshop's roof, as if trying to claw its way inside. The amber light flickered, casting jagged shadows across the shelves as the woman shoved her son behind the counter, her pulse thundering in her ears. The shattered glass at the back of the shop gaped like a wound, cold air rushing in, carrying the scent of wet pine and something sharper, motor oil maybe, or cigarette smoke. Footsteps crunched again, deliberate now, circling the building. Her ex-husband's brother stood frozen, the envelope still clutched in his hand, his gray eyes darting toward the sound. "Get down," she hissed, yanking him by the sleeve until he crouched beside her and her son. The boy's sketchbook lay abandoned on the floor, a half-drawn raven staring up with empty eyes. She gripped the brass key from the note, its edges biting into her palm, and whispered, "Who's out there?" "No idea," he muttered, voice tight, peering over the counter's edge. "But if it's tied to him, to that locker, it's bad news." "Bad news?" she snapped, keeping her voice low. "You show up with his ghost in an envelope, and now someone's breaking my window. What did he pull you into?" He flinched, rubbing his bearded jaw. "I didn't sign up for this. He called me once, years back, sounded paranoid, rambling about debts and keeping it safe. Said he'd left something for you, but I thought it was just talk. Then that letter showed up, and I figured you'd dump it on me," she cut in, her green eyes blazing. "You saw him after he left, 6 months after. Where was he? What was he doing?" He hesitated, the crunch of footsteps growing closer, now near the shop's side door. "He was hiding," he said finally. "Met him at a bar outside town, disheveled, jumpy. Said he'd crossed some people, wouldn't say who. Asked me to check on you, make sure you were okay. I told him to shove it, thought he was spinning lies again." "Hiding," she repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "While I worked doubles to pay off his debts, thinking he'd run off with someone else. And you didn't tell me?" "I didn't know what to believe," he shot back, his whisper harsh. "He was my brother. I wanted him gone as much as you did." Her son whimpered, curling tighter against her side, and she pressed a hand to his shoulder, forcing calm she didn't feel. "Stay quiet, bud," she murmured, then glared at her ex's brother. "If he was hiding, why's this key worth breaking in for? What's in that locker?" He shook his head, rain dripping from his coat onto the floor. "Could be cash. Could be proof something he didn't want found. He was always good at secrets." The side door rattled, someone testing the lock. She swallowed hard, mind racing. The bus station was her only lead. But it was too late to run there now, and the shop's old phone was across the room, useless with the line cut by the storm last week. She scanned the shelves, books wouldn't stop whoever was out there. Then her eyes landed on the fireplace poker leaning against the hearth, its iron tip glinting faintly. "Stay with him," she told her ex's brother, shoving her son toward him. She crept toward the poker, her boots silent on the worn rug, every nerve screaming as the door rattled again, harder. She grabbed the weapon, its weight cold and solid, and edged toward the back, peering through the broken window's jagged frame. A figure moved in the rainfall, hooded, a flashlight beam slicing through the dark. It swept the alley, then locked onto the shop's rear wall. She ducked, heart slamming, as the beam lingered, inches from where she'd been. The figure muttered something low, guttural, to someone she couldn't see. 2 of them then, maybe more. She slipped back to the counter, crouching low. "They're circling," she whispered, clutching the poker. "We can't stay here. We can't run blind either," he countered, his limp shifting as he adjusted his stance. "They'll see us the second we hit the street." "Then what?" she demanded, frustration boiling over. "Wait till they bust in." He opened his mouth, but a sharp thud cut him off, the side door splintering under a heavy blow. Her son stifled a cry, and she pulled him close, the key digging deeper into her hand. "The basement," she said, decisive. "There's a hatch-old coal chute. We can slip out." He nodded, grim. "Lead the way." She grabbed her son's hand, dragging him toward a narrow door behind the counter, barely used, its paint chipped and peeling. The basement stairs creaked under their weight, the air below dank and thick with mildew. She fumbled for the hatch, a rusty square in the wall, prying it open, as the thudding upstairs grew louder, wood cracking. Her ex's brother shoved his shoulder against it, forcing it wide, and she pushed her son through first, his small frame scraping the edges. Go, she urged her ex's brother, but he hesitated, glancing back as a muffled shout echoed from above someone inside now, boots stomping on her floorboards. They're in, he said, voice low and urgent. Move. She crawled through the hatch, the cold metal biting her knees, emerging into the rain-soaked alley. Her son huddled against the wall, shivering, and her ex's brother followed, grunting as his bad leg caught. The flashlight beam swung again closer now, sweeping the alley's mouth. She yanked them behind a dumpster, its rusted bulk shielding them as the light passed, inches away. A voice cut through the storm harsh, unfamiliar. Check the back, she can't be far. Her breath hitched. They knew she was the target, but as she gripped the key, ready to bolt, a hand clamped onto her shoulder from behind someone new. Silent until that moment. The rain lashed Black Hollow's alleyway, a relentless curtain that blurred the world into streaks of gray and black. The woman stiffened as the hand gripped her shoulder, its fingers firm through her soaked sweater, pinning her against the dumpster's rusted edge. Her son gasped, a small, choked sound, and she swung the fireplace poker blindly, adrenaline surging, the grip loosened, and a low grunt broke the storm's roar, a woman's voice, rough but familiar. Easy, it's me, the intruder hissed, stepping into the dim glow of a flickering street lamp. She was short, wiry, her graying hair plastered to her skull beneath a hood. A jagged scar ran from her eyebrow to her jaw, a mark the shop owner knew too well, her old neighbor, the one who'd lived next to the lake house years ago, always tinkering with engines and offering unsolicited advice. She hadn't seen her since the divorce, when the woman had packed up and left town without a word. What the hell are you doing here? The shop owner whispered, lowering the poker but not dropping it. Her son clung to her leg, shivering, while her ex-husband's brother edged closer, his limp slowing him in the mud. Saving your ass, the neighbor snapped, her scarred face taut with urgency. She jerked her head toward the bookshop's rear, where flashlight beams now danced through the broken window, cutting jagged paths across the shelves. They're tearing your place apart looking for that key, I'd bet. The shop owner's grip tightened on the brass key, its edges now slick with rain and sweat. How do you know about this? She demanded, voice trembling between fear and fury. And why are you sneaking around my alley? The neighbor's eyes flicked to the ex's brother, then back to her. Because I owed him, she said, nodding at the man. He called me last week, said he was coming here, stirred up old ghosts. I've been watching the town since. Saw those goons roll in an hour ago, knew they'd come for you. Owed him? The shop owner rounded on her ex's brother, her green eyes narrowing. You dragged her into this too? What else are you hiding? He raised his hands, rain dripping from his sleeves. I didn't drag anyone. She's the one who found Metracked me down in Anchorage 2 years ago. Said she had a debt to settle. Debt for what? She pressed. But a crash from the shop bookshelves, toppling, cut her off. Her stomach lurched. Pages in the rain was her life, and they were shredding it. Later, the neighbor barked, grabbing her arm. We need to move, bus stations, you're shot. Whatever's in that locker, it's why they're here. The shop owner yanked free, clutching her son closer. I'm not running blind with him in tow, she said, nodding at her boy, his curls plastered to his pale face. And I don't trust either of you, not after your lies. Fair, the neighbor conceded, her scar twitching as she smirked. But you've got no play here. They're armed. I saw steel under their coats. You want to fight 'em off with that poker? Her ex's brother stepped in, voice low. She's right. I don't know the whole game, but Hemi brother screwed us all. That key's our only way to figure it out. She hesitated, the weight of the moment crushing her. The bus station was a mile through town dark, deserted this late, but the locker might hold answers. Why her ex had lied, why he'd stayed, why people were hunting her now. She glanced at her son, his wide eyes pleading for safety, and made the call. Fine. But you. She jabbed the poker at her ex's brother, start talking on the way. Everything you know. They slipped through the alley, the neighbor leading, her boots splashing in puddles as she scanned the shadows. The shop owner kept her son's hand in hers, the key in her pocket a cold promise against her thigh. Her ex's brother limped behind, his breath ragged, but he spoke as they moved, words tumbling out like spilled ink. He showed up that night at the lake house, 6 months after he left you, he said, voice strained. Looked like hell cuts on his face, hands shaking. Said he'd taken something big, something they'd kill for. I thought he meant cash debts from his gambling, maybe. But he wouldn't say what, just kept saying he had to keep it from you. For your sake. Keep what? She snapped, ducking under a low awning as the rain intensified. And who's they? Don't know, he admitted, wincing as his leg buckled. He was half crazed, kept looking out the window like he expected them then and there. Gave me a number to call if anything happened. Burner, I guess. Lost it when I moved north. The neighbor cut in, her voice sharp over the storm. He wasn't gambling. I worked at the mill back then. Heard whispers about a crew moving stuff through the forest. Not drugs something rarer. He was in on it till he wasn't. The shop owner's mind reeled. You knew him? She asked the neighbor, incredulous. Enough, the woman replied, cryptic, her eyes on the road ahead. He came to me once asked for a favor. Should have said no. They reached the town's edge, the bus station's squat silhouette looming through the misty gray brick building, its windows dark, the lot empty save for a rusted pickup. The neighbor slowed, raising a hand. Hold up, she whispered. Something's off. The shop owner followed her gaze. Tire tracks gouged the mud near the entrance fresh, deep. Her heart sank as a shadow shifted inside the station, a silhouette against the glass. Then another. They weren't alone. Before she could react, headlights flared behind Thema truck peeling out from a side street, barreling straight for the group. The rain-slicked pavement of Black Hollow gleamed under the truck's headlights, a blinding glare that turned the world into a stark tableau of shadow and light. The vehicle roared toward them, engine snarling through the storm, tires chewing the mud as it closed the gap. The bookshop owner yanked her son sideways, her boots slipping on the wet ground as she stumbled toward a ditch beside the bus station lot. Her ex-husband's brother lurched after them, his limp slowing him, while the scarred neighbor dove the other way, rolling into the bushes, the curse. The truck swerved at the last second, missing them by inches, its horn blaring a guttural warning that echoed off the trees. She hit the ditch hard, mud soaking her knees, her son tumbling against her with a muffled cry. The fireplace poker clattered into the muck, and she scrambled to grab it, heart pounding as the truck screeched to a stop 50 yards off, its taillights glowing red like predator's eyes. Her breath came in ragged bursts, the brass key in her pocket digging into her thick a lifeline or a noose. She couldn't tell anymore. Stay down, she whispered to her son, pressing him into the ditch's shallow cover, his small frame trembling beneath her arm. The neighbor crawled back, her hood torn, mud streaking her scarred face. They're not playing, she panted, peering over the ditch's edge. That's no random hit someone tipped him off. Tipped off about what? The shop owner hissed, her green eyes flashing as she glared at her ex's brother. He crouched beside her, clutching his bad leg, rain streaming from his beard. You said he was hiding. What did he take that's worth this? He wiped his face, voice low and strained. I didn't get the whole story, just pieces. That night at the lake house, he had a bag small, heavy, locked tight. Said it was insurance. Something he'd lifted from them. Wouldn't open it. Wouldn't let me near it. Kept muttering about leverage. About you being safe. If he held on to it. Leverage? She spat, anger boiling over the fear. He left me with a kid and a busted life. Where's the safety in that? The neighbor cut in, her tone sharp. It wasn't cash, I'd bet my hands on it. I saw him at the mill once, months before he vanished. He was arguing with a guy tall, slick hair, fancy watch. Not local. They were unloading small ones, sealed up tight. I figured it was tools or parts. But the way they guarded him could have been anything: gems, tech, hell, even data. The shop owner's mind spun, clutching her son tighter as the truck's doors slammed open. In the distance, two figures stepping out, their silhouettes bulky with coats and purpose. Data? She echoed, incredulous. He was a logger, not some spy. What could he have? Doesn't matter what he was, the neighbor said, grim. Matters what he became. That slick-haired guy? Heard him mention the buyer someone big, out of state. Your ex got greedy, or desperate, and took a piece of their puzzle. A shout rang out from the station harsh, commanding. The shadows inside were moving now, flashlights sweeping the lot, closing in on the truck. Her ex's brother tensed. They've got backup, he muttered. We're pinned. Not yet, the neighbor said, pulling a pocket knife from her boot, flicking it open with a practiced snap. There's a culvert runs under the road, pops out by the mill. We can crawl it, lose 'em in the trees. The shop owner hesitated, the poker slick in her hand. And then what? They'll just keep coming till they get this key. Or me. Or whatever's in that damn locker. Then we get there first, her ex's brother said, determination hardening his voice. If it's leverage, we use it to turn the tables. She stared at him, torn between distrust and desperation. The truck's engine growled again, rolling closer, its lights raking the ditch's edge. Move, she decided, shoving her son toward the neighbor. You led, stays with you. The culvert was a narrow, rusted pipe half buried in the mud, its mouth choked with weeds. The neighbor went first, knife in hand, cutting through the tangle as her son crawled behind, whimpering but obedient. The shop owner followed, the cold metal scraping her elbows, water soaking her sweater as she dragged the poker. Her ex's brother brought up the rear, grunting with each move, his legs slowing him. The pipe echoed with their breaths, the storm's roar muffled above. But shouts filtered through closer now, boots splashing near the ditch. They emerged on the mill side, a hulking skeleton of brick and steel, looming through the rain, its broken windows like blind eyes. The neighbor pulled her son upright, his face streaked with mud and tears, and the shop owner grabbed him, whispering reassurances she barely believed. We're okay, but just stick with me. The bus station was a quarter-mile back through the woods, a straight shot if they could dodge the hunters. Keep low, the neighbor warned, starting forward. But her ex's brother grabbed her arm, pointing. Look, he said, voice hushed. A third vehicle, a sleek black, sovittled near the mill's loading dock, its engine purring, exhaust curling into the mist. A man stood beside it, tall, slick hair, gleaming wet. A watch flashing on his wrist as he barked into a phone. The neighbor's breath caught. That's him, the guy from the crates. The shop owner's blood ran cold. He's here? Now? Means we're close, her ex's brother said, grim. Whatever's in that locker, he wants it bad. Before she could respond, the SUV's headlights swung toward them, pinning the group in a blinding beam. Slick Hair dropped his phone, shouting something sharp, and a gunshot cracked through the storm, not at them, but into the air, a warning that froze her mid-step. The gunshot's echo ricocheted through Black Hollow's drenched forest, a sharp crack that froze the air as the SUV's headlights pinned the group in a merciless glare. Rain slashed across the beams, turning the scene into a shimmering chaos of light and shadow. The bookshop owner shielded her son with her body, the fireplace poker trembling in her grip, its iron tip useless against the threat now staring them down. The tall man with slick hair, his watch glinting like a taunt, stood by the vehicle, his phone abandoned in the mud, his posture coiled with authority. Her ex-husband's brother cursed under his breath, his bad leg buckling as he braced against a tree, while the scarred neighbor clutched her pocket knife, her eyes darting for an escape that wasn't there. End of the line, Slick Hair called, his voice cutting through the storm, smooth and cold like polished steel. He stepped forward, rain flattening his dark hair, a handgun dangling casually in his right hand, not aimed. Not yet. Give me the key, and this stays simple. The shop owner's heart slammed against her ribs, her son's small hands clutching her sweater as he pressed his face into her side. The brass key burned in her pocket, a tether to a past she'd never asked for. Simple, she spat, her voice raw with defiance. You trash my shop, chase me through the woods. You don't get to call this simple. He smirked, tilting his head. You've got no idea what you're holding, do you? He didn't tell you a damn thing. Who? She demanded, though she knew the answer. Her ex, the ghost who'd haunted her life, now dragging her into this nightmare. Slick Hair's eyes flicked to her ex's brother, then back to her. Your husband, or whatever he was to you, thought he could play us, take what wasn't his. That key opens more than a locker, it's a door to something we've spent years chasing. Then take it, she said, desperation edging her tone. She yanked the key free, holding it out, the brass glinting in the headlights. Take it and leave us alone. No. Her ex's brother lunged forward, nearly toppling as his leg gave out. You don't know what it unlocks if he gets it. Shut it. Slick Hair snapped, raising the gun now, its barrel steady on the brother. You've been a thorn too long, should have stayed gone. The neighbor moved then, fast despite the mud, her knife flashing as she lunged at Slick Hair. He dodged, the blade grazing his sleeve, and swung the gun toward Herbert. The shop owner was already moving, instinct overriding fear. She shoved her son behind a tree and charged, slamming the poker into Slick Hair's wrist. The gun flew, skidding into the wet leaves, and he roared, clutching his arm as he stumbled back. Run, she yelled, grabbing her son's hand. The neighbor hauled her ex's brother upright, and they bolted toward the mill's rusted frame, its shadow swallowing them as the truck from the bus station screeched into the lot behind. More shouts, Slick Hair barking orders, his men piling out, but the mill's maze of broken walls gave them a sliver of cover. She ducked behind a crumbling pillar, her son panting beside her, the key still clenched in her fist. What now? She hissed at her ex's brother, who slumped against the brick, his face pale with pain. It's not just money, he rasped, clutching his leg. He told me last time I saw him it's a drive. Data, records proof they've been smuggling rare artifacts, looting sites up the coast. Said he'd hidden it to keep them off you. Artifacts? She stared, incredulous. He was a logger, not a thief. Was he? The neighbor cut in, her voice bitter. I helped him once move to Crate, didn't ask questions. Thought it was a one-off. Then he vanished, and I ran too. Should have known he'd screw us all. The shop owner's mind raced, piecing it together. Her ex, tangled in a black market ring, stealing evidence to save his skin, leaving her to bear the fallout. The locker, she said, decisive. We get it, first use it against them. No time, the neighbor warned, peering through a gap. They're closing in 3, maybe 4. Then we fight smart, she replied, shoving the key into her son's hand. Hide this under that beam. If they get me, you run to the sheriff, tell him everything. He nodded, tears streaking his muddied face, and tucked the key into a crevice. She turned to her ex's brother. You said he gave you a number, where is it? Lost it, he admitted, then paused, eyes widening. Way tattoo. He made me write it on my arm, under the ink. Faded, but... Show me, she demanded. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a blurred string of digits beneath a raven tattoo, her son's favorite bird. A cruel irony. She memorized it, the poker steady in her grip as footsteps splashed closer. Slick Hair's voice rang out too near. Last chance, hand it over, or we dig it out of you. She exchanged a look with the neighbor, who nodded, knife ready. Distraction, the shop owner whispered, then stood, stepping into the open. You want it? She shouted, holding up her empty hand. Come get it. He advanced, smirking, his men flanking him until the neighbor sprang from the shadows, tackling one into the mud. The shop owner swung the poker, catching another across the knees, sending him down with a howl. Her ex's brother threw a brick, clipping Slick Hair's shoulder. In chaos, erupted grunts, curses, the storm swallowing it all. She darted back, grabbing her son, and they ran through the mill, out the far side toward town. Her lungs burned, but she dialed the number from her phone as they went, praying it still worked. A gruff voice answered after 2 rings. Who's this? Help, she gasped. Black Hollow Mill smugglers, my ex's mess. They're after use data in a locker, bus station, slot 17. A pause, then, stay alive, I'm 10 minutes out. She hung up, shoving her son behind a shed as headlights flared again. Slick Hair's SUV, battered but rolling, cutting them off from the road. He stepped out, gun back in hand. blood trickling from his brow. "Nice try," he sneered, raising it when sirens wailed, faint but growing, red and blue piercing the rain. His smirk faltered. She smiled fierce. "Time's up." He hesitated, then bolted for the SUV, tires spinning as he peeled out, vanishing into the storm. The sheriff arrived 3 cars, lights blazing, and she collapsed, her son safe in her arms. Later, they found the locker. A hard drive, packed with logs, names, dates, artifacts worth millions, her ex's desperate bid for freedom. He died for it, the sheriff guessed, tracked down years ago. The reward, $20,000, fixed the shop's windows, bought her son art supplies. She burned the photo that night, the lake house fading to ash. Her ex's brother stayed, rebuilding trust one day at a time. The rain eased, and Black Hollow breathed again hers, scars and all.